Breaking news, ladies. Registration is now open for the Fertility Awareness Mastery Mentorship Program, Class of 2023, and we start the first week of January. If you are a women's health professional with an existing practice and you've struggled to incorporate fertility awareness cycle charting into your client work, this is the program you've been waiting for. There's nothing like it offered anywhere. Transform your practice in 9 months. We start the first week of January 2023. Apply now at fertilityfriday.com/FAMM live. That's fertilityfriday.com/FAMMLIVE. This is the Fertility Friday podcast, episode number 444. Welcome to the Fertility Friday podcast, your source for information about the fertility awareness method and all things fertility. I'm your host, Lisa Hendrickson-Jack. I'm the author of The Fifth Vital Sign and the Fertility Awareness Mastery Charting Workbook. I'm a certified fertility awareness educator and holistic reproductive health practitioner with over 20 years of experience teaching women to connect to their fifth vital sign through menstrual cycle charting, balancing hormone health, and optimizing the menstrual cycle without hormones. I have been consistently outspoken about hormonal birth control over the past 2 decades and its impact on fertility and overall health because you have the right to know how your body works and how artificial hormones disrupt that natural process. I teach women's health professionals how to utilize the menstrual cycle as a vital sign in their practices, and I host live coaching programs to help you achieve optimal fertility and health because it's important to have healthy menstrual cycles regardless of whether or not you want to have babies. I'm also a wife and mother of 2 beautiful boys and a brand new baby girl. This podcast is designed to empower you to take full control of your cycles, your fertility, and your overall health. And I'm so excited that you're here with me today. Today I'm sharing an interview with my FAMM practitioner, Amy Sedgwick. And in today's episode, we cover a variety of important topics related to fertility challenges, PCOS, and I think the overarching theme of how difficult it can be to get support for health challenges, fertility challenges, in particular menstrual cycle issues, how challenging it can be to get a firm diagnosis when you have certain symptoms and not others, and how challenging it can be to find that right practitioner who takes everything seriously, gives you that accurate diagnosis, is willing to test you, and all of those things to help it to really come together. Amy shares her experience of being part of the Mormon community and how it affected her experience with fertility challenges, which is really just a powerful thing to think about how different your experience can be depending on the community that you are in. She also shares insights that she learned about her own cycle through the FAMM process, as well as how she plans to incorporate fertility awareness into her professional practice. So before we get into the interview, I'll tell you a little bit about Amy. Amy Sedgwick is a licensed massage therapist, a certified restorative yoga teacher, and is currently working towards her FAMM certification. She is a 9th generation Mormon and a woman on her own 20-year fertility journey, which has given her a unique perspective on how to navigate infertility in a family-centric culture where women are mainly valued for their ability to procreate. She shares this unique perspective as the co-host of the Mormon Fertility podcast. Amy hopes to use this experience as she steps into the role of teacher and guide in helping women access their own innate body wisdom through cycle charting, nurturing bodywork, yoga, and in creating spaces, both physically and virtually, where women can feel safe to share, connect, and heal. Without further ado, let's go ahead and jump into today's episode with Amy. And I'm really excited to be here today with Amy Sedgwick. Welcome to the show, Amy.
Thank you, Lisa.
Well, so Amy is a member of FAMM class of 2022. That's been, all of the episodes are with current practitioners. And I'm really excited to delve into today's topic that we're going to talk about because I've never talked about this on the show before. It's like a cliffhanger, but I probably shared a little bit more about this in the intro. But either way, just so that the audience can get to know you a little bit, I'd love to start with kind of my favorite question, which is how old were you when you had your first period? What was that like? And then you can kind of share with us what brought you into fertility awareness. And I think that'll get us into today's topic.
Okay, great. So I was almost 14 and I have an older sister, so I was very familiar with it. My mom actually was very open about it. So I knew that she wore tampons. I knew that my sister wore pads. She was very, and she wasn't shy to do that like in front of us. So I think that helped. But so I was expecting it. I was also homeschooled and I was one of these kids that was like, I'm curious about this. I want to learn about this. So I went to the library and I got books about it. So I knew, I started getting that discharge and I was like, what is this? So I was pretty curious about it. I wanted to be prepared. I also had a couple of my cousins who are a little bit younger than me. Actually, I think all three of them started before I did. So I remember being nervous. I remember being worried because, there was a lot of talk about the possibility of infertility and that being like the worst case scenario in a woman's life. My grandmother actually didn't start her period till she was 18. So I remember kind of being like, well, it's okay. Grandma had kids. And then I also was raised with horror stories of my dad's mother and his sisters who had horrific experiences. Like my grandma's period was never regular. She would just have massive bleeding. And my mom would tell me stories about my dad's sister who would just like have to take time off from school and just like sit on this heater vent and in like a fetal position because she was just, so these were the things that I was kind of I was aware of, but I also kind of went into it with a little bit of anxiety, afraid that I was going to be like my dad's sisters. And my sister was regular like my mom. My mom was so regular. I think she said she was 29 days and she got so regular to the point that she knew what time of the day she would start. I was like, now as an adult, I'm like, what? That's crazy. Anyway, so let me see. My first period, I remember just wiping and seeing the red. And I remember being excited about it. I was like, oh, yes, finally. So I went in and I told my mom and my sister, and it was kind of like, oh, yay, And then so they got me pads. And I remember that first time I did bleed pretty heavy. And it was kind of a shock to my body. I remember feeling a lot of lethargy. I remember like I was pale, like it just really, but I don't remember a lot of pain. And that's one thing I am grateful for is I did not inherit that. So I don't have painful periods, but I do have irregular periods. So I never knew when I was going to start. So that was really hard for my mom because like I said, she was super regular, and my sister, they didn't know how to deal with that. My mom did teach me that I should start marking it on the calendar, but when you're young, and I'm such a random personality that I had a hard time being consistent that way. So, but yeah, so as I got older, I just remember always kind of intuitively feeling like there's an imbalance here. Like I don't think I'm supposed to be irregular like this. I know I didn't have pain, but I just knew. So I would talk with people that were in health professional spaces and just kind of ask them, try to pick their brain. And they'd always be like, oh, you could take this, you could take that. But like nothing ever really helped. I guess I should say that a part of what colored this is I am ninth generation Mormon. So I was raised, and we're called Mormon or LDS. The name of the church is the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. So I was actually raised in Salt Lake City. And when I say ninth generation, like that is on all sides of my family. So like every you go back, and Mormons know their family history. So I know this. So in Mormonism, we're taught that a woman's role is to bring spirits to earth. And we're taught that we exist before we came to earth, and that we made covenants with our families and our children and God to have these families. And that's the woman's prime role, is to be the catalyst through which these children are brought, or portal. And so you can see how I was starting to feel anxiety, even just very young, when I didn't fit that mold. And then, like I said, whenever I would bring it up, other people would bring back my grandma who had 6 children. My dad was a honeymoon baby. Like, she just popped them out like crazy. And so there was no problem, So it was really frustrating. I don't know where to go from there. Do you have any questions?
Yeah, of course. I always have questions. But no, thank you for taking us through that. I feel like there's so many different pieces that I did want to touch on. I think I've mentioned this a couple of times because I also had my first period when I was 14. So what's interesting about that is I think that for anyone who thinks about it, that is kind of, it's not abnormal. So the average age is 13, but from the experiential lens, it does feel late. So if you're listening and you also had your period at 14 or later, like 15 or 16, you'll know that by that time, most of your friends have already had it. And so you're like, it was really interesting to hear you describe your experience of it. I think part of it is pretty typical. Being 14, you were kind of ready for it. You were kind of aware of what was going on. I've spoken to women who had their first period at age 10, and that can be very traumatizing especially for someone whose parents never talked about it before. So they just have this blood and they have they think they're dying, which is horrible if you think about it.
Yeah.
But what was interesting to me about your experience was that you had heard so much by the time you were 14 about your mother's experience, your sisters, your aunties, grandmas. So that was really, it was like informed consent to the max, to the point that you were actually kind of nervous about like, how's this going to go?
I remember having a conversation with my sister after she had started, and she didn't have super painful periods either, but every once in a while, we just kind of have that one off. And she was like kind of just sitting on the bed, just not feeling good. And I was like, what does it feel like? Because she's 5 years older than me. And I was like, does it feel like you need to throw up? And she's like, yeah, a little bit, but not. Like, I remember being like really curious about it, but also, like I said, just that piece of anxiety, just, but.
Yeah, no, I think that that's a really interesting part of your story that not a lot of, from the stories I've heard, I mean, I could be wrong, but not a lot of the stories I've heard do you have that level of knowledge and that level of openness. Not everyone's house is like that. So I think that that's really interesting. But when you described a little bit about your being Mormon and the belief system and the role of the woman within the culture and the context, then it makes a lot of sense why that would be such a big topic of discussion. It might not be like that in every home, but it does make sense because it's such a big part of your life.
Yeah. My mom's generation, from what I've gathered, my parents were so ill-informed about sexuality and everything. My mom has 2 older sisters, so I think she had a sister that kind of stepped in when she experienced it. But I remember her telling me it was pretty traumatizing. She didn't know what it was, but they had both, because they came from that background, they were like, we want to be more open with our children. So my mom always kind of worked with this idea that she was going to tell children about sexuality. She was going to tell us about our bodies. I mean, not with explicit detail, but her rule of thumb was, I'm going to answer their questions. So when we were 3, like, I'm one of 6, right? So when I was little, my mom was pregnant, and I was always like, oh, where'd the baby come from, Mom? And how did it get in there? And she would answer my question. It wasn't like, oh, I went out into the garden and found, it wasn't some crazy story, but it wasn't explicit detail. It was just enough to answer my 3-year-old question. And so I remember I never had a time in my life where I didn't know where babies came from. Like, I always understood that part of it. Yeah, it's just, it is interesting. I know that that's not the typical story. I know I had a lot of friends that their parents were very closed about it. So I am grateful for that.
Yeah. It's really, it's so, I don't know. I just love asking these questions and hearing the different experiences. And I think it's helpful for people to hear as well. And having just gone through a pregnancy with a 9-year-old and a 6-year-old, it was a totally different experience. And I was asked all the questions. It was just so interesting, such a different experience to have kids that are old enough to like ask all these questions. And hopefully, similar to your mom, I would provide age appropriate answers and kind of like enough detail to like answer. And then like they're satisfied and they run away. that kind of thing.
Yes.
Not
And
like
that's exactly what she said.
but just like if you were around kids, they're like, okay. And then they just like go play with, in my case, Lego again. But I think it's really important because I can give an example. Like when I was younger, I think I asked my mom something about where I don't remember, but it was something like, how did I get out? Or like something like that. Like, how did the baby come out? And I remember she kind of, I get it now, but she pointed to her leg, like the inside of her leg. And I remember actually contemplating what that was. Like, does it come out of the leg? Because I was a kid and I didn't understand that was a euphemism for the vagina. Like, how would I know? Right? Like that she was pointing there because I didn't know. So she touched the side of her leg. I mean, it's not like I thought that, like, you know what I mean? It's like I spent my life thinking babies came out of the leg. But you know what I mean? Like I was kind of like, that doesn't make sense. And then I just kind of like moved on. And
I always thought it was interesting when I would talk to some of my friends. I remember we had a friend who was so naive about it. Like he had no idea. And I think we were teenagers when we were talking about it. And see, in our culture, there's a lot of emphasis on like the scriptures, and you have all these examples of women praying for babies, right? So the way he pieced it together was that his mother prayed for a baby, God gave her the baby, and the way he explained it is his mom actually, where it came out, he was like 12, and his mom had twins, and he was at the hospital with his dad, and he was saying, so are the twins coming out of mom's belly button now? Like he honestly thought that the belly button opened up. And his dad was like, what? Like, and I remember him sharing that with us, and I was like, wow, like that was not my experience. I always knew.
Well, I'm gonna say something now. So some of you will have heard this before, and some of you are gonna leave like WTF legit and like like this girl can't be serious. So it's so interesting that you say that he thought the baby comes out of the belly button, because there are people who, similar to him, were not provided with basic education about sexuality, who don't understand where the penis goes. And to be honest, I didn't understand where the penis goes until I used a tampon for the first time. And I remember because I was looking, like I'm in the bathroom, I'm like looking at the, you know how I had OB, which is probably like not the easiest thing to do the first time. This is
those little ones
with no applicator. So I'm looking at this, like pull out the paper, and then I'm looking at this thing, and it has the picture of where it goes. And I'm trying to figure this out, right? So I'm like figuring this out. Like I put it in there not correctly. It took me a little while to figure that out. And then it was like I had to do it because I think it was like there was something that was happening in school that was in a swimming situation, and that was why this needed to happen. Anyways, so I remember like figuring this out and like putting it in incorrectly. It did not, like, not high enough, but it was in. And I remember asking my mom, like, is that where the penis goes? Is that where babies, like, because I understood it like from a theoretical standpoint, but I never understood like in my own body where it actually, anyways, too much information. My point is that information, the fact that it's like the vagina and the penis goes in the vagina and all of that, there are people who don't know, similar to your 12-year-old friend. And then they get married, and then they try to do it in the belly button. And then
I've heard this too.
Yeah, in some cases, again, look it up. It's not just me. And so there are some cases where the couple has, quote, infertility, and they're, like going to the doctor, and the doctor has to say, like, so first of all, are you having actual sex in the right place? And like, there are couples who didn't know this.
Yep. And they have to educate them. Yeah. It's pretty sad. So
that's like more egregious. And of course, there's people listening that are like, what did you just say?
Oh, I know.
To bring it back home, like, this is why it's important to have basic information about our bodies. We can laugh about it, but that's not funny. Like, you should be, this is a life skill. We need to know what is going on.
Well, and you hear those stories. Like, I remember hearing stories about how girls thought it happened with kissing. Yeah. And I remember my mom telling me about a young woman she knew who ended up pregnant, but we didn't kiss. I don't understand. Like, it's like,
yeah, you need to know the birds. Like, and it's so funny because they used to talk about the birds and the bees, and to this day, I'm like, what does that mean? Like what is that? What is going on? So, but that's exactly the point. It's just complete euphemism outside of everything. Well, so I think that a big part of then your personal story is how this all kind of relates together. I know a little bit about your experience with menstruation and where fertility awareness comes in, but maybe that's a good place to go. Maybe you could share a little bit about because you already mentioned that your cycles were irregular. What you mentioned to me off air is that one of your sisters. Well, I don't know if you have more than one sister. Do you have more than one sister?
I have one. Yeah,
okay, one sister. That means one sister and 4 brothers. Okay, so your sister has 10 children. Yes, and that's obviously like just completely normal within the Mormon. Like it's we were talking a little bit about how generally outside of Mormonism, like the culture it doesn't necessarily lend itself to that, to the point that it almost not almost to the point that it kind of discourages women from having more than a certain number of kids, where it's like a certain number of kids is okay, but then after that people start raising eyebrows. So that in of itself is a big topic, but maybe share how just being part of that community has affected your own experience with menstruation and also with childbearing or not childbearing.
Oh, it was hard. My sister's 5 years older than me, so she started, I think she had baby number 3 before I got married. And I was married, I'm in my second marriage. So my first marriage, I was married for less than a year. I'm not going to get into details, but he was healthy, and my sister got pregnant within the first month of marriage, which is expected. or I mean, not necessarily expected, but it is, and so I was expecting that too, but because I never knew when I was going to start, like I wasn't ever trained, like anything, like I didn't know when I didn't know all the details, like I've learned with the FAMM program. So I remember talking to a lot of people. There was one lady that was like, oh, I just found out that I only ovulate one specific time, so that like helped me. But then they would just like kind of drop it, like nothing would ever go there. And so that marriage ended, and then I ended up marrying my current husband. I guess I wasn't sure if I was going to go into this detail. So Mormonism is very complex. So you have what they call the mainstream church, which is the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, which is located within Salt Lake City. Well, that's the general authorities. That's what they call it. That's where the prophet lives and blah, blah, blah. But Mormonism has a bunch of different breakoffs, and you have a bunch of different theologies. And I was influenced. My family, when I was 13, got involved in fundamentalist Mormonism. And so most people know that Mormons believe in polygamy. The mainstream church does not practice polygamy anymore, but fundamentalist Mormons do. And there's still a practice within fundamentalist Mormonism where women, it's kind of very 19th century, where women are encouraged to marry older men. And so I was influenced by that a lot. And so my current husband is 20 years older than me. And we were not polygamous. He was divorced, but I was very influenced by that. Like it was normal. It was okay. And I went into the marriage with my husband knowing that he's diabetic and that he had a serious infection that has impeded some things. But I also went into, it's so crazy because Mormonism is all like, we believe that God is very involved in our lives, and that God, it's very biblical, very Old Testament biblical, like God performs miracles and all of this. And if you do what he wants you to do, then he's going to bless you. And so I went into this marriage knowing that my husband had a fertility issue, knowing that there was a possibility that I did too. Like I said, I kind of always had that underlying intuitive feeling. But I was also like, well, God is going to bless us because we are doing his will. Like, you know what? Does that make sense?
It does.
Anyway.
It really does. Yeah.
So,
you didn't go into that marriage when you were like 35, right? Like were also.
I was 20.
Yeah.
I was 21. So I was married the first time 20, and then that only lasted less than a year. And then I married my current husband, and I was 21. And he's 26 years older than me. So he was 47. And he has 7 children. from his previous marriage. And his children, his oldest is my age. So it was very, like, I came into the family and I wasn't really expected to be like mom too much, but I was like, it was really odd. Anyway, I don't remember where I was going with that, but I guess just to kind of explain the complexity, like I went into it very naive, like just this feeling that God was going to bless us no matter what, you know, like, I don't know, like I had received what we call blessings, which is like coupled with prophecy or whatever. I'd had several people tell me I was going to have children, that was my purpose here upon this earth. And so it's really interesting because you just kind of go into it naively thinking that God's just going to take care of it. And we did for many years, just like we talked to doctors a little bit. I remember in 2004, so we were married in 2002. In 2004, I had actually gone to a doctor. She was a nurse practitioner because I wanted to find out what I could do to support myself because there wasn't a whole lot I could do about my husband. And she was like, well, maybe you have PCOS because I have some of the indicators. I have facial hair. I carry a little bit of extra weight. I have irregular periods, right? But she put me on like some crazy diet. She was like, but people with PCOS have a hard time losing weight. So I want you to go on this diet. I think it was like I added brown bread. Like I would eat a meal, and then if I was hungry, I would eat a slice of bread, and that's it. Like it was weird, but you know. Anyway, so I did that for a week. I came back. I'd lost a couple of pounds. So she was like, "Okay, you don't have PCOS because you lost weight," and I was like, "Oh, okay."
Very
like,
different to what we discussed in the PCOS section of the PAD program. Naturally,
I know. I was like, "Okay, I don't have PCOS. I didn't have painful periods. I didn't have, you know." So it was like, "Okay, well, okay, that's it." And so we proceeded to my husband went to urologist. They were trying to figure out what his situation was, why, because his body creates sperm. He's not azoospermia. He does have sperm, but there's something where it doesn't get from point A to point B. So, and they couldn't figure that out. Anyway, so we just kind of just went along. I was working. I finally, in 2008, I decided to go to massage school. And during the background of this, of course, my sister is having baby. My husband's children start getting married and having babies. Everybody around me, my extended family, they're all having babies. So it was just really a space where I had to just kind of close that part of me and just, I don't know, like it's like a defense mechanism. You just kind of, okay. And I did get to a point where it was like, anytime someone would announce they had babies, I would just like, I don't know, like I would just pull back and whatever, right? It is what it is. And it was very different than the way I was when I was younger. When I was younger, I loved babies. Like I wanted to be, if there was a baby in the room, I was holding that baby. I was smushing that baby, and then as I got older, it was like, oh, another baby. Another baby, I remember one sister-in-law who was really excited because she had some infertility herself and had been in a bad marriage, and then she got married and she proceeded to have a baby, and she was really excited about it. And I understand that now, but I was so callous about it. I was like, it's another baby. And I even told her that. I had to apologize because I was like, I'm so sorry. I know it's a big deal to you, but it was just like another baby. This isn't mine. Everybody else is having babies. So let me see, that takes us. So I went to massage school in 2008. And then in 2009, my husband he's diabetic. So his eyes actually started getting bad. So he actually had to quit working because he couldn't work anymore. So he was able to get disability. And then in 2011, we moved to Northern Idaho, which is where I live now. And just kind of plugging along, hoping that God will bless me. I remember after we moved here to Idaho, we did try to go to a fertility specialist we were looking at reproductive medicine. So we actually went to a specialist in Boise. And I remember getting so frustrated because she was like, well, you're our patient and you would be our patient, not your husband. And I was like, but he has male factor infertility, right? So it's like, And she was like, well, we wouldn't handle that. He'd have to go to a urologist. And I was like, well, do you have a urologist that you work with? And she was like, nah. Like, I was like, I felt like that she was stonewalling me. I don't know if she felt like because we have the age difference. I had no idea. Like, it just felt like she was being very, I don't know, almost prejudiced against us. Like there was no support. Cause I was like, I mean, quadriplegics have babies, right? So there's gotta be something that happens here. And so I just kind of felt like this was just like a brick wall, and we kind of pulled back for a little while. We looked at foster care, and that is just so hard. I actually ended up choosing not to do foster care because my husband's younger children were really struggling and needed a place to live. So, and they were not young, like 20-year-olds, you know, but I was just like, well, we have an extra room, so let's just put that on hold for a little while and let your son come live with us and help him get back on his feet. And, you know, you try to do the right things. So in 2015, and actually there were several opportunities, several times. I think there were two different times where I've had women approach me about the possibility of adopting. Like I have my stepmom had a sister that had a baby out of wedlock, and she was worried about that. And so they were kind of talking to me about possibly adopting, but that went nowhere. You know, and that's very painful because you're just like, ugh. And then I had the same stepson, he had a girlfriend that was a little crazy, and she was like trying to claim that she was pregnant. And she even went to us and was like, I'm pregnant and your son's in jail. And so would you guys want to raise my baby? And she wasn't even pregnant. I mean, like, so I just like, I'd had these experiences that I was just like, seriously, it was really hard to just like keep my heart open. And so,
well, and this is like decades now. Like this is like over a decade now of desire, unfulfillment, and then these things keep happening. And so, because I always pointed out that when we're listening to your story, within, 10, 15 minutes, you're taking us through years and years of your life. So I just can't imagine what that would feel like compounded over that duration of time, and watch it, especially within your community. It's one thing, because this is a common thing for anyone who has struggled with fertility issues, for it to be hard when someone announces pregnancy, but within the Mormon community and within your family, I mean, it's a different level. There's the volume of children is higher. So there's like a lot more of that, the pregnancy.
Well, and yeah, and our actual worthiness is tied to it. Like I would have family members, well-meaning family members, that would come up to me and be like, well, maybe you have a secret sin, or maybe it's because you drink coffee, or maybe it's this, you need to do that. And it's like, you just need to be faithful and God will bless you. It was just like this very Old Testament ideology of you're doing
you might have
wrong.
done. Yeah, you might.
Yeah, it's like it's sin related. And I would have these conversations with myself and be like, well, maybe God just wouldn't think I'd be a good mother. And so, like it was really, really degrading and very hard to deal with. And so I just kind of I just put it in the background. I was always raised to stay positive. So I would just try to be positive and try to focus, with this background, always hoping that God would just bless me, that one day it will just happen. Anyway,
I feel the urge to say this because I also believe in God. I'm not a Mormon.
Yeah.
But I just feel the need to say this, which is that I feel that it's easy to then have this impression that all religious people are supposed to just sit there and wait for something to happen.
Yeah.
In your case, there's multiple things happening. I think it would have been useful for you to have a conversation with someone, obviously, when you were a lot younger, talk about these, like you went to different specialists. That's even more infuriating because you tried, you were advocating for yourself, you did all the right things, and you're being told, well, whatever. Right. But I think that it's also helpful to keep that in mind, that even from that perspective, it's not like every single person who had belief got everything. It's not a Houdini show here. if you have a belief system. So there's the middle ground between your faith and wanting for God to provide, but also like it would have been helpful. Like there's actual medical challenges that are present.
Well, and I was also raised in a home where doctors weren't super trusted. So I would try to lean into more natural things. And and the few doctors that I went to, I mean, it was justified. Like it just felt like they weren't really supporting me. Let's jump forward to 2015. In 2015, my husband's niece found herself at a point, both physically and financially, where she couldn't handle another baby. She was a single mom. Her ex-husband was in prison, and she had two little girls, and she ended up pregnant, and the father of the child didn't want anything to do with it. He wanted her to abort, and she was like, no, I can't do that. So as things had opened up where we actually were able to adopt her daughter. And so I'm a mom, right? Now I'm a mom. And it was crazy because I had friends, I had Mormon friends. I was very involved in my community. I worked with the young women, but there was always that wall. Like, I'm not fully one of you because I'm not a mom. And once I had my daughter, it was just like, like I had so many more opportunities. I had conversations with people. And that in itself, I mean, it was finally, great. I was grateful for it, but it was also like, I started kind of being like, well, that's kind of sad that there's that division. So after we had our daughter, I love her. She's my joy. I still was feeling unsatisfied. And like I was feeling guilty actually for not feeling satisfied with my daughter, because I still wanted to birth a baby. I still wanted to have that full feminine experience. I'd had an experience, it was a spiritual experience that kind of led me in a direction to go ahead and try to do IVF again. And my best friend actually helped me do a little bit of research, and we found that there was a facility in Spokane where on their website, they specifically say that they work with male infertility. So I was like, oh yeah, finally, maybe they can give me some answers. So we went to them, and he looked at me. I didn't have cysts on my ovaries. I didn't have any, and I find after the fact that he actually put in his notes that I had PCOS indicators, but he didn't never even say anything to me about it. He was just like, well, you don't look like most of the women that I work with. Like, you're not super overweight, and you can maybe lose a little bit of weight. But, it was kind of interesting. Anyway, but he explained to us that there is a procedure where they could go through and actually retrieve sperm directly from my husband's scrotum, and that we could do IVF that way. So we started looking at that. And then I had a friend who mentioned to me that because she was so much older, she was in a second marriage, and she and her husband wanted to have kids, but she was so much older that the doctors in the US wouldn't touch her. So she was like, we went to the Czech Republic, and they were successful in having a baby through IVF over there. So I was like, ooh, I could go to Europe. And the doctors in Spokane I think he wanted like $23,000 for the whole IVF. And when I started working with the people in the Czech Republic, it was like $7,000 for the entire thing.
Popping into today's episode with a special invitation. Join me on November 30th at 12:30 Eastern for a live masterclass all about incorporating the menstrual cycle as a vital sign into your professional practice. I'll be sharing what I've learned over the past 20 years as a fertility awareness educator, as well as what I've learned from taking dozens of women's health professionals through the FAMM process. You'll want to register even if you're not able to join us live, because I'll be sending out a link to the replay. Head over to fertilityfriday.com/live to register today. That's fertilityfriday.com/LIVE. Now let's go ahead and jump back into today's episode.
So in 2019, and at this point, I still hadn't decided that I was PCOS. Like I'd heard all the whisperings, but nobody had come out and said, yes, this is what you have. So in 2019, we went over to Prague, and we were there for about 30 days. And we did IVF, and we did a fresh transfer, and I was pregnant. And finally, it was like, yes, finally God's blessing me, like finally this is happening. And I went home, and at 11 weeks, I miscarried. And so it was like, and it was kind of interesting having my miscarriage, because it was almost like there was that part of me that was like, yep, there it is. Like I wasn't fully invested yet. Like I wanted to be, but like it was like I knew that it was going to happen. Like, I don't know. It's crazy. I mean, and I think part of it is just coupled with the 20 years of constantly just like being disappointed constantly. You know what I'm saying? And what was really odd, it was interesting. I hadn't fully expelled the baby and actually miscarried until I had gone to my midwife and she did an ultrasound and confirmed. There was like, it was almost like it was several days where I was just like holding on. Like, and my body wasn't progressing, nothing was happening. My sister came up from Utah, my sister-in-law, they all came up to be with me because I was on bed rest. But then when I got the confirmation that there was no baby, there was still blood that needed to be expelled, I came home. They had to go home. And so I sent them off and I wanted them to leave at that point. I was just like, I just want to be by myself. And it was at that point, like once my mind accepted it, then the miscarriage happened. Like it was just very interesting to me how much our minds are a part of that. Anyway, so I had the miscarriage. I didn't mention that we had 4 other embryos still in Prague. So we went ahead and I made plans to go back. So in October, my sister went with me that time. We went, and I didn't have to be there as long because they already had the embryos. And oh, I guess I should also mention, because I know you always ask about birth control. So the only time I was ever on birth control was for the IVF procedures. So they had me go on birth control because my cycles are irregular. So I was on birth control again, and I was, doing their drugs to prep my uterus, and went over there in October, did the frozen transfer, came home, and it didn't take. So that was very frustrating. And anyway, so then 2020 happens, and I was like, okay, maybe I'm not going to be able to get back over there. And because I'm not against vaccines, but I choose not to take them myself. And so I was like, I guess that's it. I don't know what to do. So I was like, okay, well, I've been given 2020. That's when I started looking at podcasts. That's when I started just like, I found your podcast. I found other podcasts. I found a fertility coach. She started working with me, and I started learning about fertility awareness. So, I mean, that was 2020. I was married in 2002. I mean, that's just like, it's crazy to think about it, that it was that long when I think about it now. It's like,
well, I think a couple things. One is that first of all, I really appreciate just how you've taken us through everything, and not just the details, but also the background and the belief system. And I feel like for everyone listening, it's all within context. So being someone who's heard a lot of stories in my life, I remember being 20 years old. I mean, in the best of circumstances, even if you're informed about things, you're still young, you're still inexperienced. And at the end of the day, it's not that you sat there for 18 years and didn't do anything. The whole time when you're taught, like if, you even mentioned, I was taking some notes, but I didn't write this exact thing down, but you said you were married in 2002. And then even in 2004, you were already seeking support. Like you did the whole time, you were looking and looking and looking and looking. So I feel like that's something to really, it's easy to beat yourself up, but we do the best we can with what we know. And that's part of the reason why this podcast exists, or the program exists, because the goal of all of this is to try to just put more information out there so more and more women can just learn more things, so that we can make the more informed choices. But I feel like if we look back at the history that you've laid out for us, the whole time you were searching and searching and looking, and not just like, right, like even with your belief system, you were praying most likely, but you were also moving your feet. That's what they say, right? Pray, but move your feet. And so you were also, and like you went to doctors and specialists. Your husband saw the urologist, and you went to the fertility doctor. And this speaks to the challenge that everybody has, regardless of their cultural backgrounds and all that, because many of us go to healthcare practitioners seeking support, but they're operating from a specific point of view. and a specific specialization. And so they're not necessarily providing the whole picture. They're all this time, it sounds like you barely even got like a firm answer. Is it PCOS or not? Right? Like the whole time you're kind of in this soup of like, oh, well, the cycles are regular. Blah, blah, blah. Like, no, this is not what we need. We need specific answers. So knowing what you know now, I mean, sure, I'll throw it back to you. Like knowing what you know now, maybe lay out for us what you wish someone would have, one of those doctors you went to would have told you when you were in your early 20s.
Oh, gosh. I wish that woman in 2004 would have just said, okay. I mean, I wish she would have known. I mean, obviously now I've realized that the knowledge around PCOS has expanded. So she had a very limited view of it. And because I didn't fit, I didn't have cysts on my ovaries. I didn't have painful periods. I just had irregular and high androgens. Like I just, and
sorry, I have to like, just because this is something I hear a lot. I think you and I have even spoken about this. There's nothing specific to the diagnostic criteria of PCOS that has anything to do with having painful periods. So it's really interesting.
You're right.
A lot of people say that, but there's nothing in that. There's a certain percent of women in general that have painful periods, and painful periods is related to inflammation and a variety of things. So but it's interesting because again, it just speaks to it. Like, and the doctors, even though the diagnostic criteria is there, we've talked about this a ton in class, but this whole thing, like you mentioned, okay, one doctor said, you don't appear to have PCOS. There's nothing in the diagnostic criteria about how you bloody appear. like, what is this? The diagnostic criteria, for anyone who doesn't know, it's like the Rotterdam criteria is 2 of the 3, and it's cyst on ovaries, androgens, and that can be show up with, hair, coarse hairs that you don't want, or, even alopecia, like male pattern hair loss, or, cystic acne, and irregular cycles. So if you have 2 of the 3, so if you have the androgens, yes, then that means, but it's like, it doesn't say if you are quote overweight or whatever. And so plenty of women who are quote lean, so that there's a whole concept of lean PCOS, which is probably invented for doctors so that they understand that it's not just about weight. Anyways, I could go on, but I won't. It's just frustrating.
I know it is frustrating because it was just like, I wish that they would have had that information, because I do have the 2 of the 3. And I wish that someone would have been like, okay, look, let's look at your insulin. Let's look at your diet. Let's start you charting so that we can see what's happening. And I didn't have any of that. I didn't know what cycle charting was. I didn't know what cervical mucus was. I do remember talking with a midwife friend, and she was talking a little bit about that, but I didn't understand that piece. So it was just really,
even the piece that you mentioned with regards to your husband and the difficulty with ejaculation. And it sounded like when I was listening to your story that the solution to that was presented to you much later, the potential IVF, because they can extract semen from the testicles if they need to. So even just having that being explained to you, that would have been at least 10 years after you were married.
Yes, actually probably even more. And it's interesting because IVF is one of those things that some Mormons believe is going beyond. Like when I was pregnant, I had a brother-in-law come up to me and tell me to my face that he didn't agree with the way we had gone about getting pregnant. Like it wasn't God's plan that we should go through doctors. I was just like, and it isn't theological within Mormonism, it's cultural. And anyway, it's crazy. So yeah, I mean, going back, I wish I would have known, I wish I would have known when my fertile window was. I wish I would have known a lot of those things, but we can't go back. So going back to my IVF story, in 2020, I did start learning these things. I started listening to your podcast and learning about birth control, and actually kind of being aware that, and I started feeling like it was kind of counterproductive for them to have me take birth control, because it's not just the regulating the cycle, but it also, it has that effect on the uterus that makes it kind of slippery. And so this last time we did finally once everything kind of settled a little bit in 2021, I was able to travel back to Prague in August. And I had decided, I told them I wanted to opt out on the birth control. I think I had actually purchased your course. And so I had been doing a little bit of charting, not serious, but I knew a little bit more about it. And so I was just like, I think I want to just let my body do its natural thing. And so I actually waited until my cycle started, and then I scheduled everything with them. So I did try this last time to make it a little bit more natural. But again, no, I still wasn't grasping, I wasn't accepting that I had PCOS. Like in the back of my mind, I still didn't fit the criteria because I didn't know enough about it. So I went in August. I actually traveled by myself that time because of the restrictions. I had to take tests and I had to wear masks, and they did the transfer. I came home and it didn't take. So that's where I am with the IVF stuff. That was the last 2 embryos that we had. So I don't think I'm going to try IVF again. I don't know. I have found clinics here in the United States that are reasonably priced. So, I mean, I'm not saying that door is closed, but I'm definitely not going to try to go to Europe again. I think the combination of the travel and everything was too hard. But it was so, let me see, that was August. And then you started advertising your fertility awareness mentorship. And I started thinking, well, this is something I want to do. I want to be that woman to educate women. I want to be that woman that's going to take that 20-year-old that has irregular cycles and help her. I want to be that person that I didn't have. Sorry, I'm getting emotional. But so I'm so grateful that I also, within that, became a restorative yoga teacher. So I started learning about how yoga and mindfulness can help with fertility. So those are the 2 things that I have right now. I started taking your program and I've learned so much. I feel so empowered as a woman. So thank you for that. And I feel hopeful that when we're ready to try, however that looks, that I've been eating all the liver and I've been taking all the supplements. So
yes. No, I it's been a long journey for you. And it's interesting what you said, that it was a third of the price, in the Czech Republic. But that comes with the travel and the stress of that. And during this time, and it's a lot. You're a strong woman, whether you feel that way or not, because you had to go through all of the things that you shared with us today. And yeah, I feel just really thankful that you were comfortable enough to share your story on the podcast, because you never know who your story helps. You never know why, people tune into these episodes. And maybe share a little bit about your practice. So we're kind of knee deep in the FAMM program at the time we're recording it. We're just about at the end. So everyone's working on their assignments and their practicum and all of that. And so maybe share a little bit then about how this knowledge in this program has been helping in your practice, and like what it's been like actually working with women through these things that we've been talking about.
So my main practice right now is just massage, is just normal massage, but I have kind of gone into a little bit of fertility massage. I am looking at becoming an RVGO practitioner, so that I can assist more in the hands-on approach. But teaching women how to chart has been just so exciting, because I'm seeing them open their eyes and having their answers or their questions answered. And there's a full spectrum. I have a couple of them that really have some struggles, but they're getting the knowledge so that they can be advocates for themselves, so that they can go and request the hormone testing at the right time and know how to do that and know how to support themselves. So, I mean, I am so grateful for this program. I am so excited. I am super excited about the future and being able to teach people. And I feel like my experience within Mormonism gives me a unique perspective. And I actually have a sister-in-law, my husband's sister, who struggled with fertility too. And she's been on her own journey. And she's been a doula and worked with women in so many different capacities that we've decided to join forces. And you're my inspiration, Lisa. We're creating our own podcast, and it's called the Mormon Fertility Podcast. And we're going to talk with our sisters in Mormonism. And it's not going to be just Mormonism. I want to talk with women of all different cultures that have that family-centric ideology, because within my search around fertility, every time that would come up, like I remember listening to a story of a Catholic woman and a Jewish woman, and I was just like, yeah, finally, something. But I just yearned for the Mormon story. And what's fascinating is now working. I mean, where I live, I'm outside of the Mormon bubble. So we're actually a minority out here. But again, I have tons of family down in Utah. I have family and friends down there. And I've just been able to just talk with them, so many of them, and hear their journeys and hear their experiences. And I've worked with a couple of my Mormon friends here. I'm part of a global network of Mormon ladies. I have one of my practicum ladies is located in Texas. I know that's not global, but it's national. But I'm hoping to get to a point where I can be that advocate for them. I can help them, teach them to be an advocate for themselves. So did I answer your question?
Yes. And once you have your podcast going, make sure to kick back and let us know. We'll add it to the show notes. So ladies listening in the future will be able to jump on and find you. Well, so a couple of questions as we wrap up today. One question that I'm asking everybody is, what, for that woman who tuned into today's episode or who's been listening to the series because she's a women's health practitioner and she's thinking about, should she jump into this program? What is, if anything, would you want her to know about your experience this year?
Oh, so much. It's been such a great experience for me. I love the format. I'm discovering that it works really well with my learning style. I mean, yes, we have reading, but I love doing the online classes and then being able to revisit those classes. I think it's awesome because, as you listen to things over again, you catch things and listen to it differently. But I would just say, if you're thinking about it, just do it because it's so worth it. It's amazing. Oh,
well, thank you for that. And of course, you're referring to, we do all our classes over Zoom, so virtually, and then we have they're all recorded. The flexible format with the recordings has definitely been something that people have been enjoying. And before we go, I would love to hear, just in your own words, a little bit more about you and your practice. So share with us just the brief kind of overview of what you do. You kind of have already, but at least we can have it in one place. And then also let us know website, socials, all the places that the listeners can find you.
Well, I'm still pretty small. I live out here in the middle of nowhere in northern Idaho. So I did have a website for a little while, but I had to get rid of it. So I don't have a website yet. Once the podcast gets up and running, we will have a website. And as I start advertising myself as a fertility awareness mentor, I will create that. But I do have the podcast, we do have a Facebook page. So if anybody's interested, they can check that out if they're interested in maybe telling their story or whatnot. It's the Mormon Fertility Podcast is the Facebook, and we'll probably have something along the same line for the website. And then I'm on Facebook, Amy Gordon Sedgwick. I have a yoga page, Yoga with Amy. My massage practice right now, I'm working under Back in Balance here in Kuski, Idaho, but maybe I didn't want to say that. maybe we can cut that out. But here in northern Idaho.
Well, give yourself a pause and then reset it.
Okay, so currently I'm working under Back in Balance in northern Idaho, but I'm going to be switching my business name. So I'm kind of keeping that until I figure that out. So I'm hoping to work with women in the massage with my Arvigo practice, and then the internet and with the podcast. And hopefully, my goal is hopefully to work into creating retreats for LDS women. My sister-in-law works with a lot of the trauma around some of that. So we're going to be working with that. But I have this vision of actually working with couples, creating a retreat space for them where I can do some of the massage, but we can also just kind of share stories and help each other, and of course the charting aspect of that too is teaching them how to do that. So it's still a baby, and sometimes I feel like I still have hopes and dreams of having an actual physical baby, but this is becoming my baby as well. So I'm trying to birth it into the world. So
well, definitely keep us posted about your progress. And like I said, whenever you have updates for us, feel free to let us know so that we can add those links. So you'll find the links, the active links for Amy in the show notes page if you're on the go, so you can check it out. And we'll be sure to put updates in the future, and as well as the practitioner directory. Noise baby. Well, Amy, thank you so much for being with us today. I just can't tell you how much I appreciate you sharing your story. As I had mentioned at towards the beginning of the episode, this is a topic that this is the first time that we're talking about it on the podcast. And so I really just appreciate sharing that perspective, because I mean, there's countless women who've experienced similar things within the community and potentially outside of the community as well. So I'm really happy that you were able to give a voice to some of those experiences.
Thank you. That's what keeps me going, is to just take my experiences and all the heartache and turn it into something beautiful and something that's going to help women. So Thank you, Lisa.
Thank you for listening. If you enjoyed today's show, please share it with a friend. You'll find the show notes page for today's episode over at fertilityfriday.com/444. I hope that you enjoyed today's episode with Amy. It was such a treat to have the opportunity to chat with her and to really get a different perspective, a window into Mormon culture and how fertility challenges can be complicated when you're part of a culture that is where fertility is so highly prized and expected and anticipated. So I feel like it really gave an important window into the complexity of fertility challenges and how it can be compounded depending on the situation that you're in. So I really appreciate you, Amy, for sharing with us your experience and your story. Also sharing a little bit about how you plan to incorporate the FAMM process in your client work. And also really excited for your podcast to delve deeper into the stories of Mormon women and their fertility, different challenges, particularly in that community. So certainly lots of really interesting details that we covered in today's episode. And if you're listening to this episode in real time and you are thinking about joining the FAMM program, the Fertility Awareness Mastery Mentorship Program, to support your women's health practice, there's still time to join at the early bird rate for the class of 2023 if you are listening in real time. And so make sure to head over to fertilityfriday.com/FAMMlive, fertilityfriday.com/FAMMlive. Early bird pricing is available through the month of November. If you're listening to this episode in December of 2022, you can still head over to that link for registration details, application details, also for details on the 2022 application deadline. With that said, I hope you have a wonderful weekend, whenever you're tuning into the show. And of course, as always, until next time, be well and happy charting.